Hello everybody, welcome to another Unreal Engine tutorial, and today I'm going to be showing you how to create a light with a light switch that is also movable in the editor so that you can place the light switch wherever you need to. So let's get started. I'm going to create a new blueprint first, so in your content browser at the bottom, I'm going to right click and go to Blueprint Class, and we are going to pick an actor blueprint. And I want you to name this something like light with switch BP. I could probably do a shorter name than that, but that'll do for now. So light with switch, and let's open it up, and you will see your default blueprint editor. What we're going to do, we need several components, as we have, if you followed my other tutorials with the doors and things, it's fairly similar to that. So we need to, first of all, using the add component button, we need to click that, and first of all we want a static mesh. So if you're not sure what a static mesh is, it is basically a 3D model. It's just a static 3D model, doesn't have any moving parts or anything. And I'm going to name that. When you import it in, it will let you name it. I'm going to call this I'm going to call it lampshade, because that's kind of what it's going to be. So you can hit lampshade, and then over on the static mesh drop down here on the right hand side, if you click this little drop down, and I'm going to use the search bar here to search for lamp, and as you can see there's two results. We've got there's a wall lamp and a ceiling lamp. We're going to use the ceiling lamp for this tutorial, so click on ceiling. If that isn't showing up, you need the starter content. Let me show you how to get the starter content. So to get starter content, if you haven't got it, you go to add new, and then up here you go add feature or content pack, go to content pack, click on starter content, and then click add to project, and that will add all the starter content into your project. So once you've got that in, you should then have access to this lamp, this lampshade model. So as you can see, it is a hanging ceiling light. Okay, and that's just fine there. We also then need something to actually give off light, because this is just a model. It doesn't actually emit any light. That is just like a white texture. It doesn't do anything. So we need to add in a light. So click on add component and go to spotlight. So probably quicker to search for it. So use the search bar at the top. Do spotlight. I'm going to add that in. I'm not going to rename that. I'll just leave it as spotlight. But however, as you can see here, it's definitely not in the right place. The light is coming from the top of the lampshade, from where the ceiling would be. So that's definitely no good. And it's also facing sideways rather than down. So let's sort that out. Using the move tool, which is this one here, you can drag it down until it's just below the light bulb. Yeah, that's perfect, pretty much. So just below the light bulb, and then also using the rotate tool, which is the next one along, or you can press E on the keyboard, and then use this handle to rotate it down. So now it's looking down. And there's a few properties that I'd like to adjust on the side. So with a light, you can edit how bright it is, you can edit the color, how far the light goes, how wide the cone angle is and stuff. We're not going to do too much customizing. All we're going to do here is, first of all, we're going to set the intensity to 0. And the reason we're doing that, intensity is basically how bright the light is. So 0 is completely off, essentially. And the reason we're doing that is because, to begin with, we actually want the light to be switched off. So I'm just going to set that to 0. The light color, I'm not going to change that, but if you wanted to, you can click on that, and it brings up a color wheel, and you can basically choose any color that you want for what color the light will be. Attenuation radius, that's basically how far the light travels. I'm just going to leave it on its default of 1000. I'm going to adjust the cone angles though. So we've got an outer cone angle here, which is currently set to 44. I'm just going to click and drag that much wider. As you can see, that looks a bit more like it. There's also an inner cone angle, which is set to 0. I'm going to increase that a bit as well. So inner cone angle, you see this, we've got a secondary cone up here. The inner cone is basically, this area is where the light will be at its brightest. Okay, so that's where it's at its brightest, and then it will gradually fade from its brightest to dimmest across this distance here. Okay, but yeah, I think that'll do just fine. Right, so that's the light there set up. We now need to add some other components in. Now, we need to add in, we want a light switch basically, and to get that, what I first want you to do is make sure you click back up here on default scene route first, because what we don't want to do is add the light switch as like a child to the spotlight. We want it to be up here. So click on default scene route, go to add component, and choose another static mesh, and this time call it light switch. So call it light switch, and then over on the right hand side you've got your static mesh drop down, and there isn't actually a model of a light switch in the starter content or anything. So what I tend to do is use, there's one called the corner frame, so I'm just going to search corner. I'm going to add that in. So I'm going to use corner frame. If we zoom in on it, it doesn't look a lot like a light switch, but it's kind of got this sort of button looking thing on. So yeah, that'll do for our light switch. Obviously in a normal project you would have a model already made of a light switch that you could use, but for this I want to make sure everybody can follow along exactly. So this is in the starter content. So we've got the light switch, and what we're going to do is on the location for the light switch, because we're going to put the light switch down below the light for now, but then in the editor, like out here in the world editor, we're going to be able to move it around. That's basically what we're setting up. So what I'd like you to do is in the location properties, set the z-axis value to let's go -300. There we go, and that will just drop it down below, so it's hovering below there. We still need one more thing though. We need a trigger box that's going to detect when the player is close to the light switch, so that they can actually press it. So keep the light switch here selected, make sure you've got that selected, add component, and do a box, search for box, and you'll see box collision. Add in box collision, and you'll see, because we had light switch selected, it's automatically like attached the box to light switch. Look, and it's appeared down here. If your box appeared up here, it means it's not parented to the light switch. So make sure it is, because that's going to be really important. You can just leave it called box if you want. That's fine. So what we need to do now is also just adjust this box and make it a bit more suitable for the size. So if you imagine this is the light switch, this trigger box isn't very big. The player's not really going to be able to get into it. So first of all, let's make the box bigger. So you've got box extent values over here on the right, all set to 32. Let's make this box, let's make it about 1 meter each way. So do 100, just do 100 in each axis, and that's now made it a 1 meter cube. It's a bit bigger, bit more likely that the player's going to be able to stand in it. The other thing we need to do is make sure that the trigger box is actually going to be sticking into the room where the light switch is facing. Otherwise, the box could go through the wall, and you might be able to turn the light on from like another room, which would be a bit awkward. So what we need to do here is we're going to use this flat. You see this side of the corner frame is like a flat shape. It doesn't have this on it. So we're going to use this backside here is what's going to go against the wall. So I'll let you to get your wireframe box, get your move tool, and just move using this red handle here. Just move it so that the back of the wireframe box is pretty much against the wall, like that. Okay. If you want to get really precise, what you can do is click on perspective here, and you can actually look from an orthographic view. Let's try left. Yeah, okay. So now we're looking from the side. It's in wireframe view as well, but we're looking at it from the left-hand side. And as you can see, let's change it back to lit mode. Yeah, you can see there's the light switch. That's the flat side, and that's the edge of the wireframe box. So you want to make sure it's like that. Okay. I'm just going to change this back to perspective view. But okay, so that's now set up. We've now got all the components that we need in the scene. But we do need some more stuff as well to set up. So I'm just going to hit compile, just to make sure there's no problems there, which there shouldn't be, because all we've done is stick some assets in. The engine's not going to know what we want to do with these yet. We do need some variables, though, ready for programming. So we're going to set these up now. So over on the left side, down in the variables section, there is a add variable button. I'd like to click on that. And it's inserts a new variable, which is normally set to a Boolean variable by default. We're going to change the type in a minute, but first of all, I'd like you to rename this to light on. So change it to light on, and then over on the right side here, you want to change the variable type from a Boolean to a float. So a Boolean is a true or false value. That's all it can be. It can just be true or false, on or off, you know, one of those type of things. A float is basically a number with decimal points, which is what the intensity of a light is measured in Unreal. So we want a float, and that's now changed the type. We can't edit the default value until we compile the blueprint. There's a little message there saying please compile. So I'm going to click on compile, and now it's going to let me edit the value. Now, just from experience, I know that the default value of a light in Unreal is 5,000. So we need to make sure that we have, when the light is on, we should probably have it at least at 5,000. So I'm going to make mine a bit brighter though, so it's a lot more obvious that it's on. I'm going to set mine to about 15,000. So 3 times as bright as the default, but I just want to make sure it's really, really visible when it turns on. Okay. So that's our light on variable. We need a second one for light off. So what you can do is right click on the variable over here and choose duplicate, and that will basically do like a copy, and it'll assign a little number at the end. Just rename it instead to light off, and then hit compile again because you can't edit the default value. So click compile, and then you'll see light off is still at 1500. We want to change this to 0, so type in 0, just hit enter. So that's for when the light is completely off. Okay, now we need 2 more variables, okay, and this is going to be to do with the positioning of the light switch. So to do this, we want to add another variable, and we're going to call this one light switch loc, L-O-C, for location. So light switch loc, hit enter, and the variable type for this is going to be a vector. So I'm going to hit vector, so it's the yellow one. Hit that and hit compile, and you'll see now a vector variable gives you an x, y, and z coordinate that you can type in. We're not going to rely on typing in variables, although we are going to switch the we are going to set the default value of this first. So if I click back on the light switch, you can see its default location that we typed in was -300 in the z-axis. We're going to keep it at -300 as a default, so that when we run our construction script shortly, you'll see what that is shortly, it doesn't basically automatically stick the light switch back up here. So we're going to keep it so it stays down there. So what I'd like you to do is go on light switch location, set the default value of z to -300, and then hit compile. Okay, and then also another variable we need is going to be the angle, the rotation of the light switch, because you know not every wall is going to be in this axis, so you might want to be putting it on a wall that runs like this way, so that's going to need rotating. So if you add a variable and call it light switch and then rot for rotation, you can put the full word in if you want, but I tend to just shorten it to that. Click on vector and then choose rotator. So light switch rot, and it is a rotator type, and just click compile. Now we don't need to put a default value in for this because the default rotation is already on 0 anyway, so we don't need to change that. What we do need to do, however, is edit. We need to make these variables visible, but I'm going to do that shortly. Let's actually add in the programming for the light switch now. So if we go to the event graph, it then gives you these 3 nodes. By default, we don't need those. Let's get rid of them. So just drag a box over and delete. We're going to set up the actual input of being able to like walk up and press the light switch. So our box, this box collision here, this is what's going to detect if the player is close enough to press the button or not. So we need to have this enable and disable input. So it's pretty much the same as we did with, if you followed my door tutorial, it's basically the same process. So I'm going to run through it again quickly. So click on the box, scroll down on the right hand side, and you will see an on component begin overlap. So it's this green button, this second green button down here. Click on that. Okay, and that adds in a begin overlap node. We're also going to need an end overlap, so I might as well do that now. So click the box again, and on the green buttons, choose the one below the one that you did before, which is called on component end overlap. Add that in. Okay, so we've now got our two events here. First thing we need to get it to do, though, is check that it is the player that has overlapped, because obviously, you know, in a lot of game projects, there's a lot of items that can move around. There's AI characters that can walk around and things. So we want to make sure it is the player that's overlapped, so that the player can press the button. So what you can do is drag off of other actor here and search for cast to first person character. So cast to first person character, and load that in. Now this node changes depending on what you're actually using as the player, and because we're using the first person shooter template, well, that's what I'm using. I know that the first person character is the blueprint that we're using as the player. If you were using, say, the third person game template, then this would be cast to third person character. Or if it's your own custom character, it will be whatever you've named your character blueprint. So it could just be player. So okay, so bear that in mind. So this node will change depending on what is your player character. You know, which blueprint is your player character. We're going to need this twice, so I'm going to click on that and press Control W to copy and paste it, and then connect that up here. Okay, and then off the top one, off of the begin overlap, we want a enable input. So search for enable input. There it is. And off this one, we want a disable input. Okay, so we've got a disable input, and we have to have a reference. If I click compile now, oh, okay, it's letting me do it now. It needs a reference to the player controller, because it does not normally work if you don't do this. So just drag off a player controller and do get, and so you'll see get player controller come up. So add that in, and make sure you hook it up to the player controller input on both of these nodes like this. Okay, so it's get player controller goes into enable and disable input. So what this code does is when the player overlaps with the box, it will be checked to see if it is the player, and if it is, it will enable input, which basically allows this blueprint to start looking for button presses from the player, because by default a blueprint does not look for input. Okay, and then this one does basically the opposite. As soon as the player leaves the box, it will stop looking for any input from the player. Okay, so that's that code there, and then we need to actually add in the functionality of pressing the button. So just moving down a bit here, and I'm going to right click. Now I've got a function already made called interact. Okay, it's a key press. If you're not sure how to add in your own button presses, I did cover that in the door tutorial video, so you might want to go back and take a look at that. Otherwise, you could just right click and search for a particular like input key, such as like the E key. Keyboard functions don't show up. There we go. So yeah, you could do something like just find the actual control button that you want to use and add it in here like that. See, they've got the same outputs on. Look, but this one here is set up to be my E key, but I could also use, for example, a button on a controller as well. I could assign it to a button on a controller. Anyway, but yeah, like I say, check out the door tutorial if you wanted a bit more detail on that. What we need to do, though, off the actual interact button, when that gets pressed, this will only get fired off if the player is in the box, because obviously if the player's not in the box, it won't look for input, so it won't recognize that this has been pressed. I'm going to drag off of interact, and we need a flip-flop node. So search for flip, and you'll see this symbol here, flip-flop. Okay, and this node basically does, first time it gets fired, it does A. Second time it gets fired, it does B. Next time it gets fired, it does A again. So it basically just alternates between A and B each time it's pressed. So what we want is A to turn the light on, B is going to turn the light off. So if we click on the spotlight over here and drag it in and let go, it will give us a reference to that spotlight. And then dragging off of this little blue pin here, this will give us like a context sensitive options based on the spotlight. And if I start to search intensity, there's a few values that come up, but we want this one that's just called set intensity. So click on that. And this node is designed to alter the intensity of the light. I'm going to plug A straight into that. Okay, and we also need a second one of these for turning it off, so I'm just going to duplicate that with Control W. I'm going to plug the spotlight into that target as well, so target has to have a connection in, otherwise it's not going to know what item you're trying to set the intensity of. Make sure B is plugged in as well, like that. Now the only other thing we need to do is tell it what intensity to set it to. Now if you remember earlier, we made two variables, one called light on, one called light off. So A, we want the light on. If you can basically click and drag the variable and hover it over there, and you'll see you get like a green tick, and let go, and that's now added that on there. And then we get light off and put that one on there. Okay, that should be all the code that we need in terms of the gameplay for it to switch the light on and off. So let's just try that quickly. I'm going to hit compile. I'm going to go back to the level editor, and I'm going to drag a copy of this blueprint into the world. And it will be through the floor at the minute, because the origin point's at the top of the light. So let's move it up, and you'll see there's the beam. I'm going to make sure it's low enough that the player can reach the button. So make sure the wireframe box is like stood on the floor. I'm just going to hit play. Have a walk over to it. So at the minute there's no light shining on the floor, so it must be off. So I'm going to press my interact button, and you see the light has come on. So yeah, that's working off and on. And if I move away from it and press the E key, it's not turning off. So I know that my enable and disable input are working properly. Okay, so that's now working. All we need to do now is to be able to set up the construction script so that we can basically place this light switch wherever we want in the level, because you know your light switch isn't going to hover directly below your light. That doesn't make any sense. So let's sort that out now. So go back to your light blueprint, and we are going to go into the construction script. Okay, so this is the construction script is basically like code, but not code that runs necessarily in the game. It's more code that runs in the editor. So this stuff in the event graph, this happens during gameplay. The stuff that happens here happens just any time while you're in the editor. So what we want to do is, first of all, get the light switch and drag that in, because that's the thing that we want to be able to change. And if you drag off of the pin on light switch and search for set relative, and you want set relative location and rotation. So that's set relative location and rotation, and connect the white pin up to that. Okay, and then if you get your light switch location variable, plug that into the new location, and get your light switch rotation variable, plug that into new rotation. Okay, so it should look like that. Okay, that's all well and good, and we can click compile, and you see when I hit compile that fired off. You get like a little animated line there to show you that that was firing, but you know, nothing's changed. It's out in the world here. I can click on, you know, select the blueprint. I can still move the blueprint, but I can't select the light switch and move it yet. So there's still something else we need to do. And if you look over on this side here, I can't see any of those variables that we added. Okay, so let's sort that out. If you go back to the light switch blueprint, down here there's this little icon next to your variables, which is like a closed eye. You want to click that eye on both the location and rotation variables to show them up. Okay, and then hit compile, What that does is that makes them what they call public, and it means that we can actually edit those outside of this blueprint. So if I click back here and now look down the side, oh look, there they are. Look, we've got light switch location and light switch rotation. So we can, let's say, let's rotate the switch, for example, in the Z-axis. Look, you see it starts spinning. Or we could get the X-axis of the light, and we can move that way, and we can move it the other way. You know, so we can move it. It's a bit clunky though, so let's put those back to what they were. That's a bit awkward and fiddly. Let's do it a bit of an easier way. So if we click on the back onto the light blueprint, another thing we can do on the location variable. This doesn't work on the rotator; it'll only work on the location. But over on the right hand side, you see a little tick box called Show 3D Widget. If we tick that box and hit compile, come back out into the editor, and now if you look closely near the light switch, you can see there's this little diamond shaped object, and it's got the little name light switch location, so it's got the name of our variable on it. If we click on that, you can see it's got a transform tool, which means we can move it. So now if I click and drag this, it moves the light switch. Okay, so I'm now going to move this light switch over to this wall here. And oops, didn't mean to deselect. Okay, but then to rotate it, we do just have to type in the Z-axis rotation that we want it to be. Most of the time it's going to be, 90 degrees or 180 degrees. So in this case, it is going to be a 90. Let's see, which way is that going to go? So it's going to be a minus 90. So I'm going to type minus 90, and it's now rotated, and then I can just click on the little diamond there and move it back against the wall. Okay, so let's give that a quick test. If I click play, so you can now see the light switch is there, but the actual lamp is still over there. There's no light switch hovering underneath it this time. If I come over here, press E, you can see the light came on. Okay, so that is working. And the good thing about doing this kind of blueprint is if you've got a level where you've got several different rooms with different lights and stuff, you only need to make this once, okay, and then you can basically copy it. So I can drag another one in. All right, and let's say put it sort of here, and then I could get the light switch loc and put it over, let's say, on this wall. And let's rotate that by 180 degrees so it's facing inward. And there we go. Hit play. So now I've got another light there. So there's two lights. I can turn that one on. Turn this one on. And look, that one stays on as well. It only works with the one from the same blueprint. So I can switch that one off. This one's still on. See? And there you have it. So that is creating a light switch, a light with a light switch that you can maneuver to anywhere else in the level. So that's really helpful for setting up an environment that has multiple lights with light switches. So yeah, hope you learned from that. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next tutorial. So thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.